DiceRoller Angular. So let's open the code from hard drive or clone it. It's up to you. If you didn't clone it, please clone it. DiceRoller Angular. If you open it from hard drive the way how I did it, you need to click here. By default, it will show main in your case, and click Update Project. After clicking Update Project, you will see additional branch in origin called Using Server. Do you see it? By default, it will be main because it was only one branch and it was in its default. Now, after clicking Update Project, at the top, you should see Using Server branch. Do you see it? Yeah, cool. Don't switch it there. First, before switching this to that branch, let's quickly run main branch, and I will just, for your changes to the local files will be overwritten. Force checkout. The reason is that I edited this code in the morning section, and I just discarded changes. I will do these changes in class, and after this I'll commit. I will do it in front of you, and after this I'll commit. So this is the main branch of the code, and this branch is generating data directly in JavaScript and displaying this data from JavaScript in browser. So this data is not traveling from anywhere. So this is definitely the simplest approach for this scenario. And using server approach is not the simplest, but it's a demo how to send request and for the data, receive the data, and display it. So again, as in many courses, examples are not the shortest possible way. They are written to demonstrate some concepts. So this is the reason why we have to learn different concepts. So in this case, this program has this program has a file called roller service ts. Roller service ts. In the previous lesson, I explained that creating a service, it's a nice way to separate business logic from GUI. Similarly, how we do it in Spring Boot, right? We created service to roll dice when we have server-side application, and that was separating logic from controller, right? Controller is kind of part of the GUI. So I created service, and this service is injectable. How did I create it? At the previous lesson, I said that I type it ng generate service roller. So it was ng generate service roller. And wrong keyboard. So ng generate service roller, and it created a class, export class roller service, empty inside and with injectable on top. Injectable root means available everywhere. We can limit visibility of what is injectable per module, or even per component if component is standalone. But in this case, we have this program has only two modules. And this will be in app module, which is global one, this app component module. It will be in the entire app. If we want to add it specifically to the module, we need to edit this, and we also need to edit part of the module where we inject. So in this case, it will be app module. We need to add it to providers. We will deal with it later, but now let's keep it by default. It is always shortest. And next. So data is generated locally, and I have a method. Sorry, it is roller service. I have a method get raw data for the number of dice. It is returning raw data object. Raw data object is defined as interface. So I created ang generate interface raw dash data. So this is how I created that one. ang generate interface raw dash data, press enter, and I got raw data interface, where it lives. Okay, here it is, raw data interface, and I defined the type as number of dice, number, values will be array of numbers and total. Okay. So when I generated this service, now I have this class, so I could define a method returning this object that is matching the interface. Not a class, it's interface. So in my service, where it is, roller service, I define it method. I explained this before. This method is returning between 1 and 6, including 1 and 6 number. Right? And it is private because it's used internally for internal logic. So explanation is on video. And I define it get raw data that is returning raw data object. This is also explanation is on video. So all data is generated locally, and since this service is injectable, I could inject it into constructor of my app component, which is just piece of GUI for the screen. Right? So app component is entire screen that may contain other components like footer, header, and so on. So if we open app component HTML, we will see that it has a header, which is another component. We have a footer, one more component. We have raw dice. We have piece that is showing up only when raw data is not equal to undefined. Before we click raw button first time, raw data is undefined. So this piece is showing data only when we have some raw data to show. So when it's not undefined. What is undefined logic? I'm quickly reminding from the previous lesson, details are in video. So it is a reminder like to refresh, or for people who didn't watch the videos, they at least know what it's about. So they are not lost. Yes? A video is in previous week. It is in lesson 9, week 9. I'm repeating quickly what is here in DiceRoller, this video. So for next 5 minutes, I'm quickly reminding this. So in my app component CS, I have raw data, which is either raw data or undefined. In TypeScript, we can define classes like apples or oranges, or I don't know, grapes, whatever, including we can do something or undefined. If we define something, if we do something or undefined, we don't need to assign them in the beginning. Because if we do this, it will assume that initial value is undefined. Otherwise, we do have to initialize it. When we declare public variable inside of component class, this public variable will be available inside of template. So we can refer to these values inside of template. So if now we have this public variable and this public variable. So in my templates, I have raw data and number of dice. So if I go to app component HTML, this will be template that is matching this class mentioned here, see template URL. So now app component HTML, here it is. This is public variable from the class, so it is available here. So I can display this thing when it is not undefined. If it is undefined, so this will be hidden. So I have additional component that is displaying list of images. It is this one. A list of images, it is this additional component. So as you see, I have a header, this piece, then I have a H2 roll dice, and I have this component. I decided to separate it, which is dice values. Roll data dot values, it's array of numbers. So this component receives input, array of numbers, and displays this as list of images that matches these numbers inside of the array. So inside of this component, this is input, dice values is input. Here it is, dice display. Dice values is input, which is array of numbers. Okay. And this is public variable inside of the template here. I display it using for each loop, and I repeat image. When we use curly braces, it will insert value inside of template. So I pick one value at a time. Since my images are in assets images dice, assets images dice, site number, create this array of list of images, right? One after another. Okay. It will be just one paragraph of images, one following another image. So let's go back to our APP component, so this one. Please notice this is input, and also footer has input. But in this case, I don't use square brackets around name. And I do use square brackets around this input. What is the difference? If you use square brackets around input name, you tell the system, calculate this part. Raw data is variable, and dot values is data from the variable, right? So this should be calculated by evaluating this expression. So this is meaning of square brackets. At the bottom, I don't use square brackets. And when we don't use square brackets, it means take this string literally. I shouldn't calculate applied space computing, because it's not calculatable, it's a string. So for this reason, I don't use square brackets around name. What inside of a footer was previously discussed, and it is video recorded. Watch it video if you missed this part. It's not essential for today's lesson, so I'm skipping explanation of the footer. Watch it on video if you didn't have it. You didn't watch this. So what do I have here? I have select drop-down list, and this is public variable inside of the matching class, right? So it is available here. What is ng module means? It means this variable is data bound in both directions. It is two-directional data binding. How it works? One directional data binding is this one. You update variable and it updates template. Right? So this is one directional. Two directional goes both ways. When you do something to template, it's change variable. It will change the variable. When you change the variable, it will do something to template backwards. So how it works here? When I change this to 5, immediately value of that variable changed to 5 right away after I change it. It doesn't show because I'm not using it at this moment. But if you attach some onChange event handler, you can print this variable value. You will see that it is immediately updated. And also, when I update this variable, it will change this part. That part is used because both of them use it. When I click roll, it will pick variable value. It will not pick it from the screen. And so I remember that this program is updating inputs storing data in local storage, so when we reload page, it remembers data. So it loaded the data from local storage and updated this variable. So let's look at that part. So in my app component, app component CS, here it is. This is a variable bound to both directions. In the constructor, it means when we initialize it, I inject two services. One, it is roller service, what you just saw, and one service that is storing data to local storage. So we can recover data when we reload the page or open this application later after closing the browser. So the data, what you see, is stored in local storage. You can see local storage if you go to settings, not to settings, more tools and developer tools. If you go to application, and click local storage, localhost 8080, you will see the data. So when we update, you'll see it is updating data. So it is the magic when we reload the page, it will pick data from local storage. Effectively, reloading the page is killing the program and starting this again, right? So we cannot really preserve variable values unless we do something special, like saving them. So this is what is happening. So roller data, roller service is doing rolling, and this is doing preserving. I will not repeat this logic of this service. It was explained at the previous lesson. It is exactly the same as before, so watch it if you missed that one. So this program starts by checking is data is saved in local storage, this. And if it is saved, I'm loading this to raw data variable. So this is local variable defined in function or in method, right? So this and I assign this variable to raw data. And since now it is updated, this is bound to the screen, annullable update screen. Next, I also need to update this because previously it could be rolled for 4 or 2, right? So I assign number of dice from raw data to number of dice variable here. And since this variable is data bound to the screen in two directions, it will update drop-down list to select number that was in saved data. So this is how program starts. If data is not stored, this will stay undefined. And if it stays undefined, it will not show any data because you see if not undefined show data, otherwise it will stay hidden. So let's imitate the thing and let's delete the thing. Delete, reload. Now it starts with undefined, so it doesn't show data. And 3 is by default because I initialized this to 3 by default. See, 3 by default. Next, what happens on raw data? I call roller service get raw data for this number of dice. And this will be last selection because this is data bound in two directions. So it is last selection. And get raw data, this will be raw data. I put it new raw data on the screen. See, this is reflected to the screen, right? And I call save raw data, and this raw data is saved. So next time, if I close up, open it again, it will display saved data. And also reload will display saved data. Okay. So that was the logic of previous lesson. Explain it quickly in 10 minutes. So again, if something looks mysterious, please watch that video. It will help. If it's clear, just okay, fine, let's go. Next. What is simplicity about this program? The simplicity of this program is that data is generated immediately in JavaScript and available immediately. We don't have to handle this delay. But delay may happen, and if delays happen, user will not see data immediately, and your program will kind of wait for data without doing anything. And user experience will suck, user will think it's broken, and will just use another website. So we should deal with delays some graceful way without freezing program. So there are some ways to deal with it, and I will explain. The popular way is to use, there is more or less brute force ways, and there are more popular ways, so I will explain. Current popular way is to use observables or reactive programming. So when we switch code from main to using server, so you go to a remote using server and check out the branch. Right? Check out the using server branch. Check out. Okay. Now, I will close this thing, so it's not. I will delete this file. This file survived from previous lesson. You don't have this file. Delete. Okay. We will create this file. So what do we have now? Previously, we had a roller service. And remember that roller service was providing data immediately. I deleted that one, and I created another service called rolling data, just to say that it is a different one. So rather than editing, I just created another with new name. So what do we have now in rolling data service? It is functional kind of replacement. It is essentially doing the same thing, but it cannot repeat the previous logic because it needs to handle the delay. So what do we have now? I declared private static string variable. Private is used internally, static is shared between objects of this kind, and it is location of the data, roll-dice. Remember, we have a DiceRoller example that it was picking data from this address. So this program will pick data from roll dice. So we need to run that service in order to pick the data. Next, the best way to pick data from a server in Angular is to use HTTP client. As you see, this client is injected into constructor. This part will not work unless you edit file called app module. Okay? So this is important for your assignment. This will not work unless you edit app module. And so you need to open HTTP app module and put this manually here. So if you forget putting this manually, what would be issue? It will not complain, but when you start it, it will show empty screen. When you open console, this console, or when this is empty, it will say cannot inject HTTP client. So in order to make it injectable, you need to insert this. Okay. So bottom line. So if this is forgotten, it will show empty screen because it crashed, but crash by default is not shown here. It will show in the console, like typically in JavaScript. And it will say cannot inject HTTP client. And the way to fix it is opening app module and put it here. And obviously this will be imported here at the top automatically. All right. So going back to the data storage, going back to rolling data service. So it is injected, oops, this one. It is injected into constructor and I use keyword private. It means it creates private instance variable of this kind, HTTP, right? HTTP client. So in order to refer to this private instance variable, I use this.http. This keyword private is created this.http as instance variable. It's a shortcut. We learned about this at the previous lesson. Now I'm calling get. This is for type check. Raw data, you already saw what it is. It is interface, right, for this. And I'm asking from this address, and this is the parameters. It's self-explanatory, number of dice. Right? Params, number of dice, number of dice. What is returned? This is tricky. It is not returning. It is not returning raw data. It is returning observable that is wrapping raw data. So if you took Android course, you remember that we had some kind of observables there already, right? And there are in Android world there are observables such as live data and state flow. Live data is slightly older approach, and it is container, where we could set observer. State flow, it's a stream with a kind of stream of data flow, an object without any container, so it is moving only when something is observing it, and collecting data from it. And we also had hybrid of both. It's called state flow. It is stream with attached container that contains last time elements that came to the stream. So in my understanding, observable of something in Angular, it is flow, state flow. It is container attached to a stream. So how to think of observable of something? It's a flow of data with a box attached to it at the end. So a box will contain last element of it. And the flow will be moving only when something is watching it. So it is lazy way. It doesn't do the work unless somebody is watching. Okay. And it's not a bug, it's a feature, it's optimization. It doesn't do the work unless somebody is watching it. So observable, it's a container attached to stream of data, but stream is not moving. It doesn't do any data transformation because unless something is observing it. So why it is a nice way to deal with the delay? Because observable is returned immediately. Why it can return immediately observable? Because it's empty. It doesn't take much to return empty box. So when we call raw data, get raw data for number of dice, it will give us return value immediately, but the box will be empty. And idea is because this function returns immediately, it will not freeze your code. When you call this function, your code will continue further. It will not wait for return of the function. So it is dealing with freezing issue by returning function immediately, but return value is empty box. And after this, your code continue running. But obviously, when data comes, it will fill the box, and you need to react with your code to update the screen. So we will set observer on the box. In your Android course, we didn't do it manually. We didn't set observers manually. In previous iteration of Android, we did, because it was older API, and older API actually required setting observers manually. Live data requires setting observer. No, not requires, but there are two ways of dealing with it. One, we directly with setting up, and second, it is data binding to the screen. So Angular has also two options. One, it is setting observer manually. Second, it is data binding to the screen and using magic inside of the template. So, what is bottom line? How else we can deal with the delay? When we ask for the data, we could use API, call it like callback API. What is callback API? You ask for data and you provide a function that will be called when data comes. You already saw callback API in the example of jQuery, right? There is example for DiceRoller written with jQuery. That was using callback API. Call the function when data comes. So this way you also avoid delay issue, because your program will continue to next line and will not freeze, because this function will return immediately. But system will call your Lambda function that you provide, call this function when data comes, So what is the issue? If I use callback API here, so what happens? I will provide Lambda function that will be called when data comes. Cool, right? But what's next? Somehow from this Lambda function in data access layer, you would have to update GUI. How on earth is possible? It's definitely could be somehow possible, but it's not a nice way. There is no nice way to update GUI from data access layer. So potentially, yes. You see, potentially it's possible if we call it directly from the GUI. But if we call this get me data directly from the GUI, we don't have a data access layer. We don't have data transformation potential in data access layer. So organization of the code will be a lot messier. So the way to deal with organization of the code, like the way to organize code nicer, is to return observable container from data access layer and set observer in the GUI. So kind of similar what Android is doing. When you ask for data from local database, you get flow, you attach state flow to it, and this will be observable container that comes from database. When data comes, your code will update the screen when data comes. So here it is. Instead of setting Lambda function here, I'm setting Lambda function inside of the GUI. So where's my GUI? I'm going to my ABP component TS. Here it is. This is my raw data, and it is still public, right? This is, I will explain this one, and this number of dice and still public. So at this moment, my HTML is displaying raw data and number of dice. And if we open HTML, there is zero difference. Okay. It's a choice to do it this way. So I'm explaining this one way of doing it. It is brute force, okay, kind of brute force. So I keep HTML the same, and is this displaying the same variables? But when I ask for get raw data, it will give me observable container, and I set observable by calling subscribe to it. So this is the way how I'm dealing with it in the program. So let's start from the top. I will explain this piece separately. So constructor is the same, except rolling data service is behaving differently. But at this moment, I'm just creating private variable of rolling data service. It's not used here. So what do I have here? If data storage service is raw data saved, I'm getting data from saved data, assigning this so it displaying data on the screen. So this logic is exactly the same, right? And I also update a drop-down list to match the saved data. So constructor is the same, 100% the same as before. On roll dice is called on press roll button, the same as before, but behavior is different because now we have to handle with observable. So this piece, it's variable assigned here. Okay. I will deal with it, but first let's see what happens here. Rolling data service get roll data. Logical, right? Or when we call on roll dice, we got rolling data service get roll data for this number of dice. So what does it return? It will return observable of roll data, correct? You just saw it in service. It's returning observable of roll data. And now I'm dealing with observable of roll data by subscribing. Call this lambda function when container is updated. Because it came empty, I cannot display it. So I need to deal with delay. So subscribe to coming data, right? So call this lambda function when container is updated. So what happens? The same, copy paste. Roll data assigned in here. Then I'm saving roll data and I'm unsubscribing. So I need this variable for sake of unsubscribing. I can make it private, and it should be private because I'm not displaying it, right? So private. I missed keyword private. Okay. So this is for internal logic. So when data receive it, I don't need to keep subscription. Potentially, observable can be used repeatedly. It depends on data source. In this case, we ask it for data from a server. It will come, and it will not come second time, unless we ask second time, right? So in this case, it makes sense to unsubscribe because we don't wait for additional data. Speaking about unsubscribing, textbooks recommend unsubscribing because it is optimization. So subscription is spending some memory. So how much? I don't know. How much efficient the program is going to be if we unsubscribe? I don't know. But since textbook recommends unsubscribing when you don't need it, I do unsubscribe when I don't need it. Okay. So what is this? Right? It is for sake of unsubscribing when I already received the data. I don't need to do this again. Okay. So question mark means it is if it is undefined, you don't call and subscribe. It is kind of safety for type safety. It will call and subscribe only when it is type as subscription. Okay. Questions? So this is the logic. Okay. So if server is not running, what would be behavior? First let's see when it is properly functioning. So let's run the server to see that it's actually working. So I will open project, call it DiceRoller service. Okay. So please open DiceRoller service. It was discussed in week 9. It is the same code except one line of the code is different. And so you need to run updates in order to open it, or in order to make it functional. Or you can just clone it again. So I will open from hard drive and I will show what is different. File, open, projects, Spring Boot, DiceRoller service, new window. New window because we need to run both. Now, if you cloned this project in week 8, code is different by this line. This is additional line. So you can either type it in and be done with it, or you can do update project, and after updating project, you update main if main shows like blue arrow down. So the difference is this line. This line is due to security restriction on JavaScript. Browsers do not allow JavaScript to pick data from random server, random port, unless server allows it. It's some kind of internal safety issue. JavaScript is allowed to pick data from the same server, the same port by default. Since it is the same server, it's okay, but it's not the same port. So I had to specify that allow JavaScript to pick data, allow JavaScript running on port 4200 to pick data from the server. So it's a brute force approach, and I decided, okay, let's do brute force approach. Without this line, it will be some crash. Security cannot pick data, something like that. So let's run this server and see behavior. And I will also, this is already running. But I need to stop because it is running previous version of the code before switching. Right? So I run this one as well. So server started. Here it is. Now let's open localhost 4200. Here it is. Now let's send. Here it is. So what do we see? Raw data. Remember that this server also printing logs here, right? So when it is processing request here at raw data, it is printing logs. So what is generated 64616, it is printed here, right? Before it sends response. So let's do 2 dice. So it prints dice game is called. So wait, is dice game is called. Number of dice 2. Number of dice 2. So it is correct, right? Then raw data generated, right? 3, 1. It is coming from here. 3, 1, total 4. Number of dice 2. 3, 1, total 4, number of dice 2. Right? So updates, you see it now 2, 3, 2, 3. 3, 3. So it's not fake, it's picking data from the server, right? So it seems like okay, right? Or at least not bad, right? Now it is 4, 4. It is interacting with the server. So I would say first approximation works, right? So what happens when we stop server and we try to interact with server that is not running? Stop. It sent request, received error, and error is not displayed on the screen because there is no way to display it on the screen. My screen is not designed to display errors. Right? So yeah, it's not frozen, but it's not doing much. Not nice. I would say from user experience, I would say like it is C-. So we need to have some notification to the user that error happens when we try to load the data. Error happened. Right? And also, when it is trying to load data, imagine some network delay. So also it will be some delay of updating the screen. If it is network delay, it's also not showing any notifications that data is loading, right? So from user experience, I would say this is C-. We need to have some message on the screen showing when data is loading, because it can be potentially long. And we need some message to show when data could not be loaded. Right? This feature is missing. So let's fix it. So this will be kind of doing together exercise in class to fix this error message issue for this program. All right? So let's think how to deal with this issue. So logically, this screen can exist in 3 stages, right? First stage, it is success, it's showing some data. Maybe not first, but it is showing some data, right? Next, remember stage when it's totally empty because you didn't run button. You didn't click run button yet, and it didn't load any data from saved data because you don't have anything saved. Let's call it initial, right? So you have initial state, success state. Also, when it is waiting for data, it is loading state, okay? And when there is error, it's error state. So technically, we have 4 states. And depending on the states of the screen, we may show different things, or at least different messages. So I decided that, okay, maybe it's easiest way to deal with it is to create some variable that will be kind of flag variable. That is, corresponds to state of the screen, and so we can display different states depending on different state of the different GUI depending on different state. If you took Android course, you remember this was like a hard-coded piece of it. Almost every program had a state variable, right, in it. It was called UI state. So in this case, instead of creating UI state as an object, because it is not Kotlin, it is harder to deal with different checking types. Types in TypeScript are not the same as types in Kotlin. So that approach cannot be easily applied. I spent some time trying to figure out how to use that approach. No, it's actually easier just to create a flag variable. So this is what I did. Instead of creating interface loading states or whatever, or use state UI, as in Android, I'm creating just a flag variable and change flag variable depending on the state. So it is far more brute force approach than we use it in Android. A part of the issue is that we cannot repeat it because it's different language, it doesn't have the same features. So I keep this run, it's not running, but because I need to test messages, right? So I'm not running DiceRoller service now, but I need to add message logic issue. So I'm creating a flag variable that to correspond to different states. And I will assign different values to this flag variable depending on the state. So what would be proper type of it? I would say enum, right? Because enum, it's a kind of flag number, right? So I declare enum calling loading state. So let's do so. So I'm open terminal and I say ng generate enum loading dash state. Okay. Ng generate enum loading dash state. Here it is. I got loading state enum. There are 2 kinds of enums in TypeScript. One is carrying integers by default, and you can do more with it. And there is the other one that is carrying strings. Both are more convenient for each scenario. I will show both today, and this one is the first, and this is for brute force, just carrying constants, integer constants. So we already figured out there are 4 states, loading states. Initial, when nothing is loaded and nothing is tried to load. We didn't try to load anything. So let's call it initial. By naming convention, it is in capital. And you see it is, IDE says it's assigned at 0. It's just telling me that it's 0 by default, but it's not part of my code. Then let's say there is some success, or success misspelled. Okay. Success. Also there is loading. It is in the process of loading. And arrow when arrow happens. Okay. Order is not important because we will refer to them using word, not number. Okay. And now let's go back to our GUI element, app component CS. And since I will display different stuff on the screen depending on some variable, I need to make that variable public, right? Because it should be available in template, and I will do logic in template. So I declare public variable loading state. And type loading state. Loading state. And I need to provide initial value, otherwise you see it was error. And what is initial? Logically initial, right? So I do loading state initial. It is initialization. Okay. Next, I need to edit the code to update this variable. So let's think. Here it is. Constructor if isRoller data, I pick a data from saved state, assign this data to the local variable, and I loaded the data, right? But not from web, but from local storage. So loading data is finished. So I would say, yeah, it's a success at this level, right? So I would say this loading data, loading state is loading state success because I loaded it, right? Now I'm about to display it. Okay. If it is not saved, it will stay as initially assigned, initial. Correct? So this flag variable is done here, right? So what happens here? When on-roll dice is called, I will start loading right away. So I'll say this loading state is changed to loading state loading, right? Because now I'm about to load it. When I press button, so its loading state is switched to loading. Okay. Next, when data is assigned, this data is assigned to this variable, it's already success. Correct? So after I assign data to this raw data, I'm changing status of the state to success. Are you with me? Okay. So loading data to loading state to success. Next, how to deal with error. Now it's a trick. What I use it lambda function to subscribe. I need to close this thing. So it won't annoy me. Okay. I use it lambda function to subscribe. And this lambda function is used when data comes. When the data doesn't come, it doesn't call this lambda function. So I need to do something better. So instead of using lambda function, I need to create object called observer. That has two options. Call this function when data comes, call this function when error happens. So now I want to wrap this lambda function inside of the object. I call it observer. So around this lambda function, first I will put curly braces. curly brace before it starts, and curly brace after it ends. It's still broken because it's still not an object. Remember that object has fields and values, right? So this is value, but I didn't say that field name is next. No, it's fine. So how to understand it? Remember that lambda function is called when data comes. Potentially, observable can receive data more than once, depending on how you insert the data. Right? In this case, it is only once when it comes from web. But potentially, data type observable, you can insert, and it should react on it. It's reactive programming. So next, it means call this function when next data comes. In this particular case, next is just once. Right? But potentially, it is just next data comes. Okay? This is the meaning of the next. Because the observable is more general than just receiving data from web. So this is an object. So let's format this data. Reformat file, whole file. Here it is. So this object starts. This is first field. Now let's put comma and write one more field, arrow. And like in the previous case, it's also lambda function, but this lambda function will be called when arrow happens. Okay. So first field of this observer object is lambda function that will be called when data comes. And second, next arrow, when arrow happens. So when arrow happens, I need to change loading state to arrow. And I'll probably unsubscribe too, because, well, already done, arrow happened, right? So now I'm switching this loading state to arrow, right? And I will also unsubscribe. Command C, Command V. All right. So we fixed the logic of arrow loading in TypeScript code. But our template will not show this error message because there is nothing in the template to show it, right? So let's open the template and see where would we insert this message. I would say somewhere here, right? Why not? So I will stick this error message either here or here. Otherwise, it's not clear where. Okay. Probably even before roll dice, right? So let's do it. So I open template, app component HTML, and let's put error message here. So remember that I used ng container if to hide thing and show it, right? So, but in this case, I will have at least two messages, loading and error. If value equal to that, show this. If value is equal to that, show that. I could use two ifs, but switch is more convenient for it. You know that if we do different things based on variable value, we better use switch. So Angular comes with switch. So I can use ng container and switch to implement this logic. So let's learn how to do it. Ng container, and now I use ng switch in square brackets because I need to evaluate what is assigned. So ng switch and base it on loading state. I have two different outcomes, right? Technically, I have four, but raw data is not displayed when it is undefined. So this logic is handled already. So what I need to do is to display loading message and error message. The rest is already handled in the program, right? Because What is missing is just messages. So how to use if? You can use any tag for cases, or if you don't imagine any tag, you use just ng component as generic, ng container, which should be generic. In this case, I want to display message as paragraph. So I use p as a case of switch. How to do it? It is ng switch case and value for the case. So let's first display loading. So it is loading state dot loading. So this paragraph will be displayed when this variable is loading state loading. So loading the role data. Okay. Next, I need to do switch case, but for arrow. And message will be could not load the raw data. Okay. Copy, paste, and this would be arrow. Or cannot. What's the problem? Could not or cannot? Okay, could not. Okay, could not load the raw data. Oh, cool. Misspell it. Okay, could not load the raw data. So let's stop it, run it, and see this error message. This will be very quick, so we will miss it. We will kind of flickering. So where is my browser? Here it is. Could not load the raw data. So this is kind of didn't even, you see this is kind of tiny flickering because it shows loading and after this error happens, could not load. So maybe we should put it like in orange at least, color, right? So in order to change color, so we need to do some style, right? So class, message maybe. Class message, and I do the same class message here. Copy, paste, class message. Now I'm going to app component CSS, and I need to define class message to change color of it. Okay, so app component CSS. So class message. So let's change color. Yeah, which one? Yeah, this kind of nice pink. Okay, maybe we want some other. So font. What is font families doing? Can we do slant? No. Font style. Yeah, we can do this. Oblique. Font size. Larger. Okay, so let's see. So it's supposed to be this pinkish color, oblique and larger. So where's my? Could not load the raw data. Questions? So, and let's see that it's still loading. So next, let's start the server. And after, now it is running, so let's change to 5. Here it is. And for some fraction of a second, you saw loading the data, right? Loading the data. And maybe it shouldn't be in red. It's still flickering. This message is flickering. So maybe it's better kind of put it at the bottom so it's not jumping. This loading data appears at the time of loading, but I think it's still okay. For one of the first programs, it's probably okay. Questions? So, and now I need to commit it, and we'll have a break, and after break, we'll restart. Yes?